Hi guys, it's Ty and welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to go ahead and talk about some more recent reads, and the few books that I want to talk to you guys about are actually mystery thriller. So let's get started. The first book that I want to go ahead and talk to you about is One by One by Ruth Ware. And this is actually my second book by Ruth Ware. I read The Turn of the Key last year and I did not like that one, but I will say that this one, for the most part, redeemed my faith in Miss Ruth Ware. So this story is about this company that decides it is going to take a small trip to the ski resort. And while they're there, they encounter this avalanche that leaves them trapped inside of the resort. And essentially there is a killer among them that is picking everybody off one by one. And overall, I enjoyed this story. One of the complaints that I heard about was people were saying that there was too much talk about what the company was. And just to give you a little bit of background, the company is this music app and it's called Snoop. And basically what the app is you can snoop on people that you follow, and you can listen to the music that the people that you follow are listening to. And the big appeal for this app is that you could do this with celebrities. So whoever your favorite celebrity is, whatever music they're listening to, you can essentially log on, snoop them, and listen to the same music that they're listening to in real time. Personally, I think it's stupid. I wouldn't really care. I don't care what people are listening to in current time, but in this book, this app is really popular. And I feel like we get a lot of talk about the company because it's essentially what's driving the motivations for these characters. So basically what's happening is this company is kind of going under, and they are in the middle of deciding whether or not they want to be bought out. And we have two of the people that work there that do not want to be bought out. And then we have two people that are there that want the buyout. And then we have this wild card. And basically both sides are trying to get this person to vote one way or the other. This story is told in two perspectives. So we are getting the perspective of Erin, who is the host at the resort. So she works there. And then we are getting the perspective of Liz, who is that wild card. So everybody there is trying to get her to basically choose one side or the other. And I will say, I didn't mind all the talk about the business, but it did take up a big chunk of the beginning of the book. So it was about 100 pages into the story before anything even started to happen. And if you didn't like a lot of the talk about the company, then you most definitely was not going to like the first 100 pages, which would probably hinder how much you was going to like the rest of the book. But once all the action got started, it was, I don't want to say it was great, but it was good in my opinion. It kept me entertained. I will say I also was able to figure out who the killer was pretty early on in the story. There were a couple of moments here or there where I thought maybe it could have been somebody else, but from the very beginning, my prediction was spot on. I will also say that the ending of this book was dragged out just a little bit. It could have been about 20 pages shorter. I did appreciate us getting the background of why everything took place, but I just don't feel like it had to be dragged out for as long as it was. I did end up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't the best thing that I read. It wasn't the worst thing that I read. I was entertained. It did what it did for me. And I will say, I don't think I would be reading any of her older books just because they didn't really appeal to me. But anything that she comes out with in the future, I think at this point, I would have to give it a try. The next book that I want to talk about that I will say I really enjoyed is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I will just say right off the bat, I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. It was very, very, very good. And I heard a lot of people raving about this book, and I would have to agree with everyone else that said they really loved this. So this is following our main character by the name of Pip, who is a high school senior who decides to do her senior capstone project over solving a murder that took place 5 years prior to a girl by the name of Andy Bell. The case was closed because the cops determined that her boyfriend Sal is the one that killed her, because there was a lot of evidence pointing against him, and he ended up committing suicide a few days after she went missing. So we actually never found her body, and because of all that evidence, like I said, he was pinpointed as the killer, but Pip did not think that he was the one that murdered her. So she decided that she was going to do her own investigation along with Sal's younger brother, Ravi. So we are essentially following her around as she is doing her own investigation. And one thing that I really liked about this book was how the story was told. So it's told in interview format, text messages, police reports that we're reading, or reading her capstone entries that she would essentially be presenting at the end of her project. And I really like that, and I like that style of writing when it's done well, because it's one of those things that keeps me interested in the story, and it, in my opinion, it makes the story faster to get through. Another thing that I really liked in the story was how many twists and turns there was. So like I said, we're following her. She's doing her own investigation, and there are so many people that I feel like she names as suspects, and they all seem like plausible suspects. And 1 minute she'll be thinking it's this person, and then she'll find some new information, and then, you know, you're like, oh my gosh, maybe it's this person. And it was just to the point where I stopped trying to figure it out, because it just seemed like everybody could have killed this girl. And another thing that I actually kind of liked that the author did was the person that was killed, Andy, she didn't make her out to be a very likable character. We found out a lot of things about her, and at some points it kind of made me feel like, you know, for lack of better, you know, terms, like I could understand why somebody would want her dead. Not that I condone people killing people, but it was like these people are warranted for how they feel against this girl. So that was something that I actually enjoyed. One thing that I had to get past was, I mentioned it earlier, Pip is in high school, but some of the things that she was doing in her investigation, I just don't believe a high school student would have done it. She is out here breaking into people's houses, which, by the way, is illegal. She is following people around out in public and stopping them in public places and interrogating them. She is following dangerous suspects, like she's hiding in her car and like driving behind them and following people to their houses. And it's just like, I just don't believe that a high school student would be doing all this, especially not for no senior project. Like, I don't get it. And throughout this story, she's like getting threatened, you know, as she's getting closer to figuring out who's doing it. People are sending her, you know, threatening notes, threatening text messages, and she just will not stop. At some point, I was just waiting for somebody to bop her upside the head, because she was just, she was doing too much. She was doing way too much. But once I kind of got over that fact and just remembered that I'm reading the story, it was good. You know, I just like this character. Like I said, she was doing way too much in my opinion, but it made sense for her character. And it was just twists and turns throughout this entire story. It kept me on the edge of my seat. This was one of those books that I would put down and be thinking about it at work in my own head, trying to figure out who did what, and it was great. I would highly recommend this. Now there is another book that's out in the series that I actually went out and bought recently, and then the third book in the series is coming out, I want to say in September. So I would highly recommend this if you have not read this book yet. So the next book that I want to talk about is No Exit by Taylor Adams. And I enjoyed this, but this story was not, it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So this story follows a college student by the name of Darby who is trying to rush home over Christmas break to her mother, who she found out has late-stage pancreatic cancer. While she's on her way home, she is driving through this terrible snowstorm, and she ends up having to stay at a rest stop, and she has to stay there until the snow plows come out and plow the streets off. While she's at this rest stop, she has to go outside to try to get cell reception so she can figure out how her mom is doing. And while she's out in the parking lot, she is in between her car and this van. And in the van, she realizes that there is a kid trapped inside. So now she is at this rest stop with a group of strangers, and she's trying to figure out who this kidnapper is. And she has to stay there all night. Now, what I thought this story was her actually trying to figure out who the kidnapper was. I thought we were going to spend the whole day with these strangers, or the whole night rather, with these strangers, and we were going to be trying to figure out who is the one that kidnapped this person. In reality, what happens is, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but we ended up finding out who the kidnapper was really early on in the story. And basically, this is just her trying to survive the night with this kidnapper. I would have preferred it to be a guessing game, more or less, of who is this person, rather than we know who the person is, so now we're just watching her trying to get through the night. Another thing that I didn't really like was the villain themselves, because it just didn't seem realistic. There was a point when, as soon as she figured out who it was, we get these descriptions of how this person likes to burp a lot and they like to fart a lot. And I'm just like, really? That's the kidnapper? I'm supposed to believe that this person is extremely dangerous? So it took me a while to get into the story after we get this information and we find out who the kidnapper is early on. But I want to say about the last half to the last third of the book, it really picks up. There are some twists in there that I did not see coming. It gets graphic, and this girl goes through the ringer. And at a certain point, I just felt so bad for her. Now, in this story, she made a lot of dumb decisions, and a lot of this stuff didn't have to happen to her. But while it was happening to her, I felt so bad for her. And the ending of this book made up for how I felt for the first half of the book. So I ended up giving this a 3 stars. So the last book that I want to talk about, I actually still don't really know how I feel about it. I liked it, but I'm just not sure really where I stand with that. And that book is The Project by Courtney Summers. So this story is about these 2 sisters, B, who is the older sister, and Lo, who is the younger sister. And at the beginning of the story, early on in their lives, we find out that Lo was involved in a tragic car accident that took the lives of both her parents, and she is in the hospital basically fighting for her life. And while she's in the hospital, her older sister B abandons her and ends up joining this group called the Unity Project. And the story is told between the 2 sisters. So in B's perspective, it's being told in the past, and in Lo's perspective, it's being told in the present. And also very early on, we find out that while Lo was at the train station, she runs into this guy that claims that he knows her, and he ends up jumping in front of a train to his death. And we find out that Lo works at this magazine. Her boss is friends with that guy's father, and the father wanted the magazine to essentially look into this group because he thinks that the Unity Project is what led his son to murder himself, to kill himself. And Paul, the head person of this magazine, says that he doesn't think there's anything wrong with this group, and they checked out. A lot of people claim that the Unity Project is a cult. He says they're not a cult. They're just this group that positively affects the community, and Lo knows for certain that there's something weird going on with this group, and she is an assistant at this company, and she wants to look into the group for herself because she knows this is where her sister went, and she also wants to have the chance to prove that she is a good writer so that she can get a promotion at her job. So we are following Lo as she is trying to get close to this group and figure out what exactly is going on and figure out where the heck her sister is. Because once her sister joined the Unity Project, they were essentially estranged from each other, and she never heard from her sister again. So that's the perspective that we're getting from Lo. And then in B's perspective in the past, we are following her as she joins the group. We learn why she ended up joining it and the things that happened to her while she was in the group. And at a certain point, their timelines are getting closer and closer together. That's all I'll say about that without spoiling it. Now, I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. I feel like I would have rated it a little higher if this book's tone was how it was at the last third of the book. So throughout the story, we're essentially trying to figure out whether or not the Unity Project is a cult. All signs point to this is a cult. And anytime you're talking about cults, you know, it's this dark, bad thing that you're talking about. And you don't really get that kind of tone in the beginning. And in the last third of the book, we're finding out all the terrible things that were happening in this group, but I wish we kind of would have seen a lot of it. You kind of see it in a subtle way, but you don't really see it. I just feel like this book could have been a lot darker than it was. I think it's a young adult book. I'm not really sure. I think it's young adult, and maybe that's why this just didn't go as far as it could have. But I still liked it. It was still one of those books that I couldn't put down. I read it in a couple days, but in order for this to have become a 5-star for me, I just wanted it to be a lot darker than it was. It did touch on a lot of heavy topics, but if you read this book, I think you would know what I'm talking about. I just feel like it could have been a lot darker than it was. I still enjoyed it. I still will recommend it. And if you're somebody who don't really like dark stories, but you kind of want to be like, just on a tip of it, I would definitely recommend this. But if you're looking for something that's a lot darker and a lot heavier, I don't think this one would do it for you. But that's all that I have for you guys. So please remember to subscribe and like and share. And I will talk to you guys later. Bye.